So you want to get rich in the Viking Age. Picture the longship, 150 cubic meters of oak, 400 kilograms of iron, 3,000 meters of rope, a sail of 112 square meters, and 27,000 hours in the hull. That figure comes from Roskilde, where a museum built one of these ships again with period tools. So it is a labor bill, not a period document. That is the dream. Here is the invoice. In the year 1018, Cnut's demand on England came to 19.8 million pennies, reckoned in the only coin the kingdom struck. About 57,000 late Anglo-Saxon coins survive in the recorded Viking Age hoards of the Baltic and the North Sea. Same coin, same kingdom, same century. Two figures out of the same coinage, and they do not sit together at all. The thinnest place in this whole record is the one nobody filled in. What a person cost. Start with the country doing the paying. England was not a place with a strongbox. It was the most heavily coined kingdom in Northern Europe. 73 named mints under Ethelred II, and 14 more nobody has managed to place on a map. Not 73 cities, 73 places where a man with a license and a hammer turned bullion into money the crown would answer for. Now cross the water and look at whose name is on the metal. Scandinavian museums hold close to 500,000 Islamic silver dirhams, more than any other place on earth. One island took an absurd share. Gotland has produced over 70,000 dirhams by itself, and 2/3 of every Viking Age coin ever dug out of Sweden. So here is the part that will not sit still. England struck its own money at 73 places and has almost none of it left in the ground. The silver lying in Scandinavian soil was struck in the Islamic East, at mints no Scandinavian controlled. Money was flowing uphill, in a currency nobody up there could issue. Two men did write down how wealth got measured here. Both make the whole worse, not better. Ibn Fadlan was an envoy out of Baghdad who met Rus merchants on the Volga in the year 922. At 10,000 dirhams, he says, a man had a neck ring made for his wife. At 20,000, 2 of them. One more for every 10,000 after that, worn at her throat where anyone could count them. Irish law did the same job with a different unit. Value there was reckoned in cumul, a cumul being a female captive, set at about 3 ounces of silver or 8 to 10 cows. A wife's jewelry as a running total, a woman as a unit of measurement. Both state what a man is worth. Neither is a transaction, that is the whole. For the largest trade of this entire period, no document survives from Scandinavia giving a price with the 4 things a price needs: a place, a date, a buyer's name, and a figure. Not one. There is a figure that comes close. It arrives late, and it is not a receipt. So here is what you are actually acquiring. You are not buying a share of the plunder. You are buying a set of scales. The kit is small enough to hang from your belt. A folding bronze balance, the arms no longer than your hand. A cloth pouch of lead weights, cast and filed to match a standard the next port would also accept. A knife. That is the working end of the Viking economy, and it fits in a fist. Now why the balance and not a purse? The coin coming up from the south was the Islamic dirham, struck to a nominal weight of 2.97 grams. As found, they run a little either side of that, and the clipped one's lighter still. Nobody in Hedeby or Burqa cared whose face was on it. The weight was the point. A dirham was not a coin worth a fixed amount. It was a piece of silver of a known and reliable mass, which is why a Baghdad coin could work as money in a Baltic marketplace no caliph had ever heard of. The unit you counted in was the mark, and a mark was reckoned at 8 orar. One of those ounces, an irar, ran somewhere between 24.5 and 27 grams depending on whose weights you were standing next to, which puts a mark at roughly 200 to 216 grams. That range is not vagueness on my part. There was no single mark weight across Scandinavia, which meant the man with the more generous weights won every transaction he could hold on them. Now open a real deposit. 1999, a field at Spilling Farm on northern Gotland. Under the floorboards of an outhouse, in 2 separate caches, 14,295 coins, 486 silver armlets, 20 cast silver bars, 67 kilograms of silver before conservation. Coins, jewelry and bullion in one hole, stacked together by whoever put them there. To him they were not 3 kinds of thing. One commodity, 3 shapes, and every shape had a weight. Here is the part that catches people who came for a treasure chest. A great deal of the silver in these hoards has been deliberately cut up. Arm rings hacked into segments. Coins snipped in half and in half again. Ingots chopped through with a chisel. That is not damage, that is change. You cut a ring because the balance said the sale was worth less than a whole ring, and silver does not stop being silver when you shorten it. The same habit turns up in English soil. The The Curedale hoard, put into the ground near the River Ribble around 905, holds about 8,600 objects weighing roughly 40 kilograms, some 7,500 coins, and around 1,200 ingots, arm rings, and lengths of cut silver. One caveat on spillings. A third cache alongside held over 20 kilograms of bronze scrap, which is not inside the 67. The silver figure is silver only, and I am not going to tell you what any of it is worth in today's money. That conversion is meaningless across 1,000 years of changing wages, so every comparison here stays inside the period. 67 kilograms, one floor, one farm, one island. That is the largest of them. The scales cost you almost nothing. The ship is the door price, and the door price is not paid in metal. Take the inputs one at a time, because listed together they sound like a shopping trip, and separately they are each their own year of somebody's life. 150 stacked cubic meters of oak is not a stack of lumber. The long side planks, the strakes, have to be cleaved from tall straight trunks, and the curved frames come out of the crown of the tree where the grain already turns the right way. So you are not buying wood. You are selecting individual living trees. In a forest you either own or can persuade someone to let you cut, and each one has to be the right shape before you touch it. 400 kilograms of iron in a world with no blast furnace. That is bog ore, roasted and smelted in small clay shaft furnaces, a few kilograms at a time, each firing eating charcoal that somebody burned in a pit for days. Then every kilogram of it gets drawn into rivets by hand. 3,000 meters of rope means hemp grown, cut, rotted in water until the fiber lets go, dried, combed, and spun. A sail of 112 square meters, which on the Roskilde reconstruction was flax, and on the original would almost certainly have been wool, spun and woven to a cloth tight enough to hold wind. And then the hours. 27,000 in the hull, close to 40,000 across the whole build, worked by 15 to 20 boat builders over 4 years. Here is the part that resets what a long ship costs. She was about 30 meters long. 27,000 hours across 30 meters is 900 hours of skilled work for every single meter of her length. Map that onto something you already know the shape of. This is not a boat purchase. It is a small factory running for a year, and the men on the floor have to eat for all 4 of those years before anything floats. So the real door price is not silver at all. It is control of a forest, a bog, a hemp field, a flock, and 20 men's working lives for 4 years, held together long enough to finish. Which is exactly why ships like this belong to kings and to the very rich, and not to ambitious young men with a plan. The ship in question was built in the Dublin area around 1042, oak-built, seagoing, rowed and sailed by a crew of roughly 65 to 80. And 2 notes before this goes any further, because both cut against the figures. The hours come from a modern rebuild at Roskilde using period tools and period methods, not from any document a Viking wrote, and the crews were partly learning the craft as they went. That cuts in both directions. As for the ship herself, she survives because she was broken up and sunk in a channel in Roskilde Fjord to block it. The last job this 30-meter warship ever did was to be a wall. Now the obligations, which is where most of these operations actually died. Around the year 890, a Norwegian chieftain named Othere stood in front of King Alfred of Wessex and talked through his own holdings out loud. Somebody at that court wrote it down, and it is the closest thing the Viking Age has to a working account read into a record. Start with his stock. 600 reindeer, of which 6 were trained decoys used to draw the wild ones in close. 20 cattle, 20 sheep, 20 swine. He said he plowed the little he plowed with horses. Those 6 decoys are the interesting line. Per head they were worth more than the 594 ordinary animals standing behind them, because a decoy is not livestock. It is equipment. It is the thing that turns a wild herd into a catchable one, and it takes years to make. Then the tribute, and this is the part that recurs every single year whether or not anything went well. It came graded by rank, and from the highest born of the Sami who paid him, the schedule ran. 15 marten skins, 5 reindeer skins, 1 bear skin, 10 ambers of feathers, an amber being a dry measure, so 10 of them is a serious volume of down, 1 coat of bear or otter skin, and 2 ship's ropes, each 60 ells long, made of whale or seal hide. Read that as a cost sheet, and the structure is completely familiar. The reindeer are the fixed line. 600 animals need herding in a catastrophic year, exactly as much as in a good one, and the herd does not care what the market did. The tribute is the variable line, and it came in on top. But look at what the variable line is made of. Skins, feathers, rope, a coat. Not one item on that list is money. There is one of the wealthiest men in northern Norway, and his income arrives as things that rot, things that need storing, and things nobody in his own valley wants to buy because they already have them. His neighbors have marten skins too, which means his silver has to come from somewhere else, and somewhere else is a very long way away. Consider the size of the market he is aiming at. Heby, at its height around the year 900, covered about 24 hectares behind a rampart running roughly 1 1/3 kilometers and held something like 1,500 people. Estimates run from 1,000 to 1,500 depending on how many you put in a household. And not all of that enclosed ground was even built on. 1,500 people. That is the customer base at one of the biggest towns on the whole route. So the recurring cost of being there is not a payment. It is a voyage. Every year, the herd has to be kept, the tribute has to be collected, and then somebody has to carry all of it south to a town of 1,500 people and find a buyer. Or the whole year converts to nothing. And there is a second reason that conversion was hard, built into the money itself. Every ounce of silver in the north was imported. None of it was mined there, which means the supply was somebody else's decision, made a very long way off, and when it thinned, there was no local tap to open. You would expect that to make the north poorer. Here is the part that surprises almost everyone. The money did not get scarcer. It changed material. Icelandic law fixed the rate in writing. 6 ells of legal standard vadmal, the coarse 2/2 twill homespun every farm could weave, stood for 1 eirier, an ounce of silver of about 24.5 grams. The cloth had to be woven 2 ells broad to qualify, and it was assessed in 20 ell pieces. An ell was 49.2 centimeters. Put that against the weight system. 8 ounces to the mark, 6 ells to the ounce, so a mark of silver is 48 ells of cloth. At 49.2 centimeters to the ell, that is a bolt about 23.5 meters long and just under a meter wide. That is what a mark of silver looked like in a country that had run out of silver. 23 meters of gray woolen cloth, rolled up, sitting in the corner of a turf house. Now the counterintuitive part. Look again at the conditions attached. 2 ells broad. Legal quality. Assessed in pieces of a set length. A farmer's wool does not become money when he shears the sheep, or when his household spins it, or when the loom finishes it. It becomes money when a man with the authority to measure it holds it up, spans it with his fingers, and says yes. The work is entirely yours. The standard is entirely somebody else's. And every rule in that law tells you what people were doing. Nobody legislates a minimum breadth unless weavers were shaving the breadth, and nobody specifies quality unless bad cloth was walking into settlements as good. 2 honest problems with that figure. It survives only in Gragas, the Icelandic law code, which was written down in the 13th century about law that ran 200 years earlier. So it is the earliest surviving statement of the rate, not a Viking Age price list. And the rate itself moved over time, because as silver got scarcer and cloth got commoner, the cloth bought less. 6 ells to the ounce is the early figure, not a constant. One last thing about commodity money. In Ireland, the cumul stayed in use as a unit of account long after it stopped describing anybody who was actually being sold. The measure outlived the transaction. Money in this world remembers what it was originally made of, and what it was made of here was cloth, cattle, and people. Now the arithmetic, and it stays in one currency the whole way through, because England had exactly one denomination and everything else is a way of counting it. 991. The English fleet has just been beaten at Malden, and the first tribute recorded as an actual sum goes out the door, £10,000. Then it happens again, 16,000 in 994, 24,000 in the year 1002, 36,000 in 1007, 48,000 in 1012. And do not add those up because they are not installments of one bill. Each one is a separate demand in a separate year, agreed with a different force under different pressure, and stacking them into a single running figure is precisely the error the chroniclers themselves invite you to make. 4 payments, 4 negotiations, 4 years apart. Then 1018 and Cnut, £72,000 from the kingdom, and 10,500 more out of London on top of that, which comes to £82,500 inside one annal year. Now turn that into coin, because pounds were an accounting word and nobody ever held one. The pound of account was 240 silver pennies. £10,000 at 240 to the pound is 2,400,000 pennies for 991 alone. 82,500 at the same rate is 19,800,000. That is the figure this whole thing opened on, and now you can see where it came from. So weigh it. And here I can only weigh one of them honestly. Surviving pennies of Ethelred's CRVX issue, struck from roughly 991 to 997, run between 1.58 and 1.73 grams. Take 1.6 as a working figure. 2,400,000 pennies at 1.6 grams is 3,840,000 grams. Just under 4 tons of struck silver. For the first payment, the small one. And that is where the weighing stops, and I want to be straight about why. CRVX was a single issue. The mints cut the penny's weight deliberately from one issue to the next, which means the coins that paid Cnut nearly 30 years later were not these coins and will not carry this figure. Anybody who multiplies out the whole run of tributes at 1 6/10 grams is inventing a number, and I am not going to hand you one. Here is the part that should stop you anyway, and it needs no scales at all. Go looking for those pennies in the ground. One figure comes back. About 57,000 late Anglo-Saxon coins in the recorded Viking Age hoards of the Baltic and the North Sea, with 41% of them from Gotland. Now hold that figure to what it actually counts. It counts coins somebody buried and then never came back to lift. That is all. A penny melted down into an arm ring is not in it. A penny spent into somebody's purse and spent on again is not in it. A penny dropped in the mud of a street in Hedeby is not in it, and never will be. So that number never was the remnant of what England paid. It is only the part that happened to stay in the ground. Now the failure mode, and it does not look like anything you would recognize as a business failing. There is no court, no creditor, no seizure. It looks like a floorboard. Start with the trade at full stretch. 871. The annals of Ulster record Amlaib and Aymar coming back into Dublin out of Alba with 200 ships, bringing with them into captivity in Ireland a great prey of Angles, Britons, and Picts. That entry is the machine working exactly as designed. A fleet goes out, and what comes home is people into a town that had a market for them. One caveat, analysts reach for 200 the way we reach for hundreds, so read it as a very large fleet rather than a tally somebody took on the quay. Now the other end of the same system, in roughly the same decade, at the far end of the Baltic, somebody at Spilling Farm on Gotland lifted the floor of an outbuilding, put the silver of a lifetime into the ground in 2 lots, put the boards back, and then did not come back for it. That is the whole failure. Not a loss, not a theft, a non-return. And here is what makes it a structural problem rather than one man's bad luck. It was not remotely unusual. More than 700 silver hoards have come out of Gotland, holding something like 180,000 coins between them, against roughly 80,000 coins from hoards in the whole of mainland Sweden. A landmass over 100 times the island size, with something like 10 times its population. 700 holes on one island. Each one is a household that stopped. Think about why that happens. Because it is the design and not an accident. Silver that is valued by weight has no institution standing behind it. There is no bank, no deposit, no written credit, nobody who owes you anything on paper. The metal in your pouch is the whole of your position, and the only genuinely safe place for it is somewhere nobody else knows about. Which works perfectly, right up until the moment you are the only person who knows. Then a man dies at sea, or in a fight, or of a fever in a bad winter, and his working capital simply stops existing as money. It does not pass to his sons. It does not enter anybody's accounts. It sits under a floor as metal, and the household that came after him started again from nothing, standing directly on top of the answer. That is the flaw in the whole arrangement. A bullion economy has no mechanism for surviving its own owner. Every one of those 700 deposits is a going concern that ended in the one way this system could not recover from, quietly intact and unrecorded. So put 2 hulls in the water side by side, out of the same yards, in the same few decades, and run the columns. Column 1 is the warship. About 30 meters of oak, 65 to 80 men aboard, and no hold worth the name. You already know what she cost to build. 4 years, 20 men on the floor, and the timber, iron, rope, and sail that went with it. Every one of those numbers is a number you paid before she touched water. Column 2 is Skoldilev 1, built around 1030, a different animal entirely. 16 meters long, 4.8 wide, heavy pine planks, a rounded belly and a draft of about a meter. She carried up to 24 tons of cargo, and she sailed with a crew of 6 to 8. Read those 2 lines together, and here is the part that undoes the entire picture of this period. 24 tons, split across 8 men, is 3 tons of freight for every mouth you have to feed. The warship carries 80 mouths and nothing at all in the hold. The famous ship, the one in every illustration, is the one with the worst carrying figure in the fleet. There was a middle option, and it is worth naming because most trade actually happened there. Skolderev 3, Danish oak, 14 meters by 3.3, 4.6 tons of cargo, 5 to 8 crew. That is under a ton of freight per man. Call it a coastal boat for a farmer with a surplus, not a fleet vessel. Now stack the two traders against each other, because the gap is the entire argument for building the bigger one. A single crossing of the ocean-going ship carries more than 5 full loads of the coastal boat, and it does it with roughly the same number of men aboard, 6 to 8 against 5 to 8. The hold grows enormously. The wage bill barely moves. Now set a good year against a bad one. Same operator, same shed. A good year is the gnar. 2 crossings before the weather turns, 24 tons each way, and 8 men eating. The cargo does the earning, and the crew is small enough that the earning survives the wages. A bad year is the longship. 27,000 hours already sunk into a hull that cannot carry freight, and 65 to 80 men who eat every single day, whether a raid comes off, whether a tribute is agreed, or whether you sit in a fjord for a fortnight because the wind is wrong. The costs are all fixed, and the income is entirely an event. And the spread between those two columns was never a margin. It was 2 different businesses using the same planking. One of them is freight, and freight scales with hull volume. The other is violence, and violence scales with men, which is the wrong thing to scale with, because men eat. Which is why the men who got rich in this period were mostly not the men in the warships. They were the ones who owned a hull with a fat belly, 6 friends, and somewhere reliable to sell. 2 honest caveats on the figures. Those cargo capacities are reconstructions worked back from hull volume and draft, not quantities anybody wrote on a manifest. And the crew numbers move depending on how many men you put to each oar and how many non-rowers you allow aboard. So, the figure the record does not contain. The nearest thing that survives is a scene in Laxdæla saga, written down about 250 years after the events it describes. A man called Höskuldur buys a woman named Melkorka for 3 marks of silver, out of a merchant stock where the other women are going at 1 mark each. 1 mark, which is 48 ells of the cloth we measured out earlier, or a couple of 100 grams of metal on a balance. That is the price of a person, and it is the only price this entire period will give you, and then the flaw in even that. Melkorka is set at 3 marks precisely because the saga needs her to be exceptional, standing next to a row of 1 mark women, which means the single surviving figure may be a storyteller's price rather than one anybody ever handed over. That is the settlement. It is a poor one, and it is all there is. 2 men then and 2 endings. Othere sailed the length of Norway, walked into a foreign court and talked his own holdings out loud to a king who had a scribe in the room. 600 reindeer, 6 decoys, ropes of whale hide. That is why you know his name 1100 years later. He got himself written down. The man at Spilling Farm did the opposite. He kept his figures to himself, under a floor where nobody could count them, and they are still there, which is exactly why nobody knows his name. There is a reason those 2 outcomes fall that way. England had 240 pennies to the pound, which means an English demand could be written as a number and filed. Scandinavia weighed. A weighed transaction leaves a tilted balance pan, and then nothing at all. You opened on a chronicle entry and a sum a king wrote down. That entry survives because a monk in a scriptorium had a reason to keep it. The woman sold for 1 mark does not survive because not one person in that market had any reason to write her down. The Viking Age handed you an owner's record with no operator's record underneath it, and that missing half was never an accident of what happened to rot. It is the shape of the evidence, and once you can see it, you cannot read a hoard the same way again.